Well, I'm Milissa Holland, and I've been a county commissioner in Flagler County for the last 6 years. It has given me the ability to have a front row seat and to watch current legislation and legislation that's been passed historically over the last few years. Some of it has been unbelievably detrimental to our county and has had a significant negative impact on our residents and our community. As a local leader, I've really had to kind of factor that in to how I've spent my time as a representative. I think being a state representative is twofold. One, you certainly represent your constituents within your district, and you do that by meeting with local leaders. You do that by forming relationships within the community for those issues that not only your residents and constituents firmly believe in, but see as something of a positive impact on your community. But not only the representation, which I've been very successful in doing and creating. I remember the first time being in Tallahassee, it was at the request of the city of Palm Coast and the mayor of Palm Coast, and FDEP and FDOT were requiring the city to put in a $4 million walkover on Old Kings Road, which the city felt strongly was not necessary. So we had to argue before the governor and cabinet with the two secretaries at the time sitting in the room with their staff who were arguing obviously their opposing position, and our argument prevailed. And it was nice to see. It was cross-party because I'm running as a Democrat and the mayor of Palm Coast is a Republican, so we were able to join forces in a very nonpartisan way and tackle an issue that was very important to our community and save the residents in the long run for an infrastructure need that they felt was not necessary. So that's one aspect of running for state representative. It's what you do for your local communities while you're in Tallahassee. And there are issues they face daily in regards to the regulatory agencies or just local issues with legislation, or they're looking for different needs to be met. And so I think that's part of how you see yourself as a representative. The other part is really taking a proactive approach on different initiatives that you feel very strongly about that will move the state of Florida, forward. One of them being that I feel unbelievably strongly about is education. It's a top priority of mine, and it's not throwing more money at the problem. It's really kind of creating a comprehensive overhaul to the system to ensure that we're making the wise investments into the education system. I am a firm believer that a strong education system will open up greater opportunities for economic development, give a great competitive advantage to our state in regards to attracting and enticing different companies that are looking to relocate. And also it helps the small businesses within your local communities thrive and grow the economy. So that is something that I have taken on as more of a proactive approach. The second issue that I feel like I can really hit the ground running on is bridging that gap and building that bridge between Tallahassee and local governments. I believe strongly that local control is something that should be met and enhanced every single step of the way. As I said, I've given you one example of how there's a big disconnect, but there are several others that I could utilize on tour that I have been to Tallahassee day in and day out fighting those issues with that disconnect. Pieces of legislation such as the online travel companies, that's an issue that I took on. I chair the Tourist Development Council, and tourism is a big part of our local economy. And it's been something that it has sustained us through these challenging economic times. And so when Tallahassee decided to push legislation that would create an exemption for those online travel companies, it really gave an unfair competitive advantage to our local hoteliers. So we took a strong position in Flagler County. We fought legislation and we prevailed 3 years in a row. So I'm very proud of that. I'm sure we're going to have to do that again and again. It's a hot issue and one that keeps continuing to come up. We're also involved with a lawsuit with 17 other counties in regards to this issue to fight this exemption on a different front. And then there's another piece that I feel very strongly about, and that's the regulatory agencies in general. We are dealing with a beach restoration issue in Flagler County, one in which we've gone through a study and partnered with the Army Corps of Engineers. And it's been a frustrating process due to the fact that it's taken several years to get through certain steps. We're at, I think, step 6, and it's been 12 years. So you can imagine you have to go through 20 steps to get to the ability to apply for federal funding. And so in the meantime, we have an issue with our road bed on A1A in Flagler County. So we're working with FDOT to try to shore up that road bed. The problem becomes is when you bring 4 different regulatory agencies in one room, you quickly realize that they don't speak to each other. And it's unbelievably ineffective and inefficient. And so you have this kind of silo mentality that's going on within those agencies, and they're all really strongly advocating their position on why they feel their $6 million would be great with shoring up the road bed. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really have a great impact if the beach restoration process and the project and the proposals that come out of that are totally contrary to what the solution FDOT was going to create. So it's a bit of a problem. I was sitting there scratching my head during this workshop going, do you ever talk to each other? Do you ever just sit down and maybe come up with a comprehensive solution that might be productive for a positive end result? And they're just not doing that. So, I believe I have the ability to really engage in that conversation and demonstrate some clear examples of why it's not working and why I think having the opportunity to sort of create this collaborative effort with solutions is one that will enhance many different solutions across the state of Florida. So I take this 2-prong approach, and I think it's one that I hope that every representative will have the ability to do. I think what gives me a unique opportunity is where I've sat for 6 years and how I've really been part of the process. I serve the county in many different directions. I've been appointed to serve on the Northeast Florida Regional Council for the last 5 years. I was elected by 6 other counties, including my own, so 7 in total, to chair the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. That's a strategy where we incorporated a one vision thought process, working with all the economic development arms in the Chamber of Commerce throughout 7 counties. And what it gave us the ability to do is create a document which we then pass forward through the Economic Development Administration. And they pass this document. It gives the ability to each county have a prioritization list for infrastructure needs within that county that will enhance economic development opportunities. But it also streamlines the process and creates that one vision. So it's a unified front. It's the economies of scale. So we're all working in the same direction, and we're not necessarily competing against each other, but we're having that conversation day in and day out. I served the state on the Florida Museum of History Board of Directors. I was appointed by Secretary Browning to serve in 2 years. So I am actively participating in the Viva Florida, which is going to be an unbelievable, issue that not only occurs throughout this region, but throughout the state of Florida. So we are the ones that partnered with the governor and the Secretary of State in an effort to hear proposals, hear different ideas, to further educate and inform not only those that live within our state, but are coming into our state of what the significance of this history is going to tell. And so I've been part of that process as well, and that's been one that's very interesting because Florida has a very rich history, and in order to celebrate that, I find it very interesting that when else in anyone's lifetime, or your children's lifetime, or your grandchildren's lifetime, will you ever be able to experience a 500-year celebration? Certainly not, for any of us sitting in this room. So that's going to give us a great opportunity to really market and promote our communities. It's going to, again, really talk about why Florida is so special and what makes us so unique to the world. And so we'll have a lot of international exposure with that, and I think we're taking full advantage of that opportunity. As I said, I'm chair of the Tourist Development Council. I started a foundation in my father's name. My father was one of the founding members of the city of Palm Coast. He was the first to serve on the city council. He was an advocate for environmental issues, but a huge advocate for future planning and growth management. I chaired our comprehensive plan rewrite. I worked closely with what was former DCA and now DEO. Another issue that I've advocated strongly for and won before the governor and cabinet was an issue that really affected our residents locally. And it had everything to do with growth management. I've served on 1,000 Friends of Florida Board of Directors also for some time now. And I brought them into the discussion with some of our residents because there was a development that was being proposed on our barrier island that really changed the landscape of who we are and what we represent. And so the residents came together rather quickly, determined that this was not in the best interest of our community. They certainly saw the need to have some development occur in this area, but not what was being proposed. So the Board of County Commissioners sided with the residents' concerns, and we voted unanimously. Well, then the developer went through the appeal process, through the administrative hearing officer. We prevailed again, and then they appealed again before the governor and cabinet. And so I testified before the governor and cabinet on behalf of this issue and got a unanimous vote in support of Flagler County's position. So I feel that, you know, I've done a great service to certainly those that I've represented in the last 6 years. Flagler County has been my home for 25 years, so I'm looking to remain there. I've raised 3 children there, and I just love it. I love this whole area. I love what it represents, and I think there's some real opportunities to really set us apart in a unique position here. And I'm looking forward to be part of the process and the discussion.
Good. I'm going to start off with some questions. You brought up education, so I'm going to bring up education. You brought up growth management, so we'll go into that next. The law of the land now is pay for performance, also called merit pay. And in St. Johns County and Flagler County, you both have excellent school districts. So both school districts would end up paying, presumably a lot of the teachers would earn merit pay. And that's millions of dollars above and beyond. Where's that money going to come from?
I go back to those investments and the overhaul of the system. Where we're making the investments today, certainly if you look at the state perspective, I don't believe we're making the investments correctly. When you're talking about standardized testing and you're spending a tremendous amount of money for those testing and not seeing a lot of measurable outcomes and not really understanding where the benefit lies. It certainly is very restrictive for the teachers' creative ability to teach, and the students lose out in the end because we're actually educating our students and then they're going off elsewhere. So we need to really make this a focus and a priority. You know, I think at the end of the day, you do have to do a complete analysis on where you're spending your money, and you have to prioritize on where that money is being spent, and then you have to measure it, and you have to constantly measure it. You have to ensure that if you're making those investments, you're demonstrating a positive outcome. And I think by doing that, and it's not going to happen overnight, but you have to roll up your sleeves and you have to do the work required to do that.
I get all that, but the question was, where's the money going to come from to pay for merit pay?
Well, today, I mean, you know, certainly not by raising taxes. I don't think that's the answer. I think that the money would have to come out of either looking at alternatives or changing where we're spending current investments. I mean, I also think that having that local control and that ability to have local control. I mean, I can speak for our school system in Flagler County. And St. Johns County school system is absolutely an amazing school system as well. But we've made investments in technology. Now, it would be great for us to have more local control of those dollars and determine best where that merit pay would fit in and how we would pay for it. That's taking that comprehensive approach. So today, where would that money come from? Well, it would have to come out of the education budget. I mean, do I agree with that? No. Would I work hard and diligently to make sure that if there's ways to move around? You know, as a Flagler County Commissioner, we have certainly seen a change in the economic condition. So we've had the ability to create a strategic plan which will allow us for the next 5 years to spend well. And I always say communities that spend well, plan well, or plan well, spend well. That's the same with the state of Florida. And if we're not doing that, then we're doing a disservice to those taxpayers on where their money is being spent. So I think doing an overhaul of the system is what's going to be required in order to meet the needs and to, better understand where those investments are going and where the outcome's going to be. And we've been able to then take that plan and to get out of the business of some of the things that we didn't need to be in the business for. I'll give you an example, active recreation. We're no longer in active recreation, we're in passive recreation. We let the municipalities participate in active recreation. So we have taken a big part of our budget and we no longer require spending money on those activities. We've now shifted it over and worked collaboratively with the municipalities so they're not in passive park creation. We've all identified our roles. We all identified where that money's coming from and how it's being spent, and we've done that in a really efficient, effective manner.
Okay. Do you favor vouchers for publicly funded vouchers for religious and private schools and/or private schools?
I don't think that's the answer. No. I grew up in a public education system. I think that my children have gone through the public education system, and it's public for a reason. And I think there's great opportunities to have a great education in the public education system. Do I believe that the charter schools that have been developed, we have 2 that have been unbelievably effective within our community. So it's not taking away from the public education system, it's actually an enhancement because it's more of a specialized school system where it focuses differently than necessarily our public education system. So I think there needs to be that balance there. Do I believe in vouchers? No, I don't think that's the answer.
Do you believe in, or do you support public funding for for-profit charter schools? In St. Johns County, we have 2 in existence. We have 2 more planned, but they're all nonprofit. But the big movement in other parts of the state is for-profit charter schools.
And I'll answer it very directly. No, I don't.
Okay, that's great. A sentence response in less than an hour. That's good. No, I mean, you're doing very well. But we have had some candidates who come in and really do enjoy talking. Do you believe in, there's a Senator Wise from Jacksonville who is term limited, has tried every year to get a bill passed that would teach the biblical version of the creation of life in science classes. Do you support or oppose that?
No, and I know Senator Wise. That's a great question, and I guess to be very direct, I believe in the teachings of the science of evolution, and I believe in that strongly for many reasons. I think it gives the student a different way of looking things and the history of the evolution. I'm also pretty strong on keeping that separation of church and state within government entities, but there's a history to be taught there. The level of delving into that, I think, is something that we need to have some discussion about, and to ensure that that separation is respected, but at the same time we're really encompassing what that history was and occurred.
You started out in your introductory remarks by talking about growth management. Certainly is a hot issue,
Yes.
and a very controversial issue.
It is.
What changes, if any, would you propose in that? And we'll go into some specifics.
Well, I can give a good example of, now that DCA was, certainly dismantled and put under a different organization. Just when you put it under a different organization doesn't mean it's more effective or works better. We had to go through another example with that development that occurred in our community, or didn't occur because of what we went through. And that was a 2.5-year battle. When it came down to the end of the battle, we were sitting in a room in Tallahassee with representatives from DEO, and they had to sign off on our ability to do a closeout agreement, a build-out agreement. Essentially what that does was it took a very old development and allowed everything that matured within that development to then say, we recognize all the impacts that have been met, all the requirements that have been met. We put funds aside for future impacts, and we felt as a commission that was necessary then to move on and make some different decisions. Well, we had to go through DEO to do that. And my hope was that we were going to go up there and it was going to be a different organization and having a different conversation. One which allowed us to really create our position and make it known and for the position to go through smoothly. That wasn't the case. The language that they were arguing about was one that Linda Shelley was sitting on our side of the table, and I don't know if you've ever known or met Linda, but Linda actually wrote the Growth Management Act in Tallahassee. So she was serving as a representative for a group of people that hired her to represent them on this issue. And she was just shaking her head, and this gentleman said, but no, this is what this states, and it had to do with a particular aspect of the law that they were still requiring. And she said, but that was not the intent of the bill. And finally she said, do you know you're talking to the person that wrote this bill? I can tell you this was not the intent. So it became unbelievably bureaucratic in nature. It took us several meetings to kind of vet through these discussions, and at the end everything was fine. But I just saw it as completely unnecessary, and I thought it was contrary to what the governor had stated his intent was by certainly dismantling DCA, and that's not the relationship that we had in those meetings. What would I recommend changing? Again, 2.5 years, couple $100,000 later, fighting this issue for us to have local control and self-determination of what our community worked for us. And I would love to recommend a lot more local control. I do think there needs to be some oversight. I do think the regional councils provide a service in regards to having different representatives, both from the gubernatorial appointment side and the elected official side. And that's been a great arena where I have witnessed a lot of really productive discussion and oversight under some amendments that have come through different development proposals. So I think utilizing them makes a lot of sense. I know funding was cut out last year for the regional councils and continues to be a trend. And the more you can keep those decisions localized, the better it is for the process.
Okay. One of the changes in the growth management law was that you no longer have to show there's a need for a house to get approval for a house. And you folks in Flagler are living the dream with
yes.
a 5,000 home subdivision. And that is a very divisive issue in St. John's as well. Some people saying, hey, let the market dictate, and the others say, oh my gosh. Where do you stand in that? Basically, the law says you don't have to show there's a need to get permission.
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting because we're trying to figure out a way in helping the City of Palm Coast. The City of Palm Coast has 18,000 buildable lots remaining in the ITT development. Now, ITT obviously developed that and planned that, some 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. I can guarantee you if that was plotted and planned today, that would never, ever would have been permitted through the regulatory process. It's one that allows for urban sprawl at its finest. And so I also believe that when you look at a comprehensive approach and you look at planning for the future, I think it makes imminent sense. And I said this to a group of people recently. I said, how many people in this room know how much it costs to pave a mile of road? Nobody in the room knew the answer to it. I mean, it's $1.2 million. So us as elected officials, that has an impact on the decisions we make today because the maintenance of those roads are going to be put on the residents in the future. And so I think it's important to have that balance. And you have to do those visioning exercises. You have to ensure that you're creating different modes of transportation in the future and reducing the costs for future infrastructure needs. So I think in some circumstances the needs has benefited the City of Palm Coast because now they've been able to plan several large future developments in that area. Rainier being one of them. Now, if that's going to occur in the next 20 years, who knows? I mean, that's a crystal ball. I think no one can really answer. But what I do think it's given them the ability to really look forward in the next 20 years to allow, again, using tax dollars to spend in for the future development of infrastructure needs. So if we're expanding our transportation network, well, those conversations are going to be really important in the next few years on where we spend those dollars. If it's going to be on alternative modes of transportation, where the development pattern is going to occur. So that has given us the ability to do that. I think that's been a fairly good portion of the restructuring of what the Growth Management Act intention was and the rewrite of that. I'm also a huge advocate for the environment, huge advocate. You know, what St. John's Water Management District is doing currently is causing me a great concern we've got a very strong environmentally sensitive land program in Flagler County, one that the residents have held in very high regard, and we've created some great partnerships out of, and we utilize those lands to actually help the economy today. So, you know, I think having that local determination, having those conversations, having it a little bit more flexible. I do absolutely believe that there needs to be some amount of regulation, without question. I have a good friend of mine who just sold a very large tract of land in Bunnell and bought a ranch in Texas. And he called me and said, "Oh my God, it's great. You know, I built this house and it doesn't require permits." And I mean, I'm talking to him going, "What?" He said, "Well, they figure if you're dumb enough to build a house that's really in bad condition, then you're, you know, dumb enough to have to rebuild it." And it was fascinating to me because I just
dumb enough to be a Texan.
I know. But I was definitely fascinated by how, you know, no regulation really, I don't think is the answer. So I think having those discussions with different stakeholders and groups that have, you know, the responsible intent in mind, that have been through the experience of not only development, but future planning and future growth models.
Let me just get
sure.
The law says you don't have to show there's a demand for houses to get approval. Do you approve of that? Do you agree with that or not?
Okay. Well, can I answer it a little differently? And I'm going to say yes or no, but I'll tell you why.
You can go to option C.
Well, I'll just say this because the impact. I think that the impact of the development, as long as the impact that is being created because of that proposal, and it's not being put on the burden of the residents that are currently there, then I think absolutely to take that away makes sense. But if you take away proportionate share, which they have, and different means of kind of creating that investment in future development, you're doing a disservice to the process as a whole. So I think it's worked in our case, you know, because of these old antiquated developments that just aren't working anymore. But again, I think there needs to be a responsible discussion in the future.
Okay. Part of the growth management says that transportation concurrency is optional, and that's caused a wrinkle in this county and probably in Flagler as well. And they're basically saying that if this goes away in the absolute extreme, then transportation concurrency would go away. What's your view on that?
Well, we kept it strong in our comprehensive plan. We actually, it's a mandatory thing. So we didn't opt out, we opted in. And we did that because, again, you know, the future of transportation in my mind, you know, I serve on the Regional Transportation Study Commission. And we're in the process of doing a complete analysis of what our future roadways are going to look like within this region. And we take into account the future progressive growth and where that's going to occur. And I'm a huge believer that it would be great for us to go on a road diet. You know, I grew up in New York, and you know, my grandparents didn't own a vehicle. They didn't even have a license till they retired down in Ormond Beach. So we grew up taking public transportation everywhere we went. I mean, now I grew up in Poughkeepsie, but we spent a lot of time in Manhattan with my grandparents. It was an unbelievable way to travel. Do I think we're ever going to be like in New York? No. Do I think there's alternatives and options for us to create an environment in which we offer different modes of transportation which take away the need to expand on our roadway system? Because the more roads we're building, the more we're taking away about what makes us unique and beautiful. So we kept it in. I'd be a strong advocate that it needs to be kept in. I didn't agree with that position.
Okay. I'll just ask a couple more questions and then I'll shut up. The state jobless rate has gone down almost 2%, but the Legislative Office of Economic and Demographic Research has said that if discouraged workers had not left the workforce, the jobless rate would have gone down 0.3%, and then most of the decline is because people have just given up. And so that's a sign that what the state is doing is not working. So if you agree with that premise, what would you be seeking to do in the legislature to spur job creation in the state?
It's a great question. I also serve on the Center for Business Excellence Workforce Development Board.
How many boards are
I
on?
know, it's quite a bit. But, it's given me the opportunity to really see how the money is funneled through these workforce development boards, and really where the money is being utilized, and if it's being utilized effectively. I believe the strongest thing we can do in the state of Florida is work with our higher learning institutions to ensure that the businesses that we're targeting are one that we have the available educated workforce immediately. Again, I'll use Flagler County as an example. We were the fastest growing county in the nation 2 years in a row. City of Palm Coast was the 5th fastest growing city in the nation 5 years in a row. Well, that growth obviously was the construction industry. We were growing by leaps and bounds. Our economic vitality depended on keeping those people employed. Well, we now have the highest unemployment rate in the state of Florida. So you can clearly see that what we were banking on wasn't working, and when the bubble burst, it hurt a tremendous amount of people in our community. That this is all they've ever known. This is all they've ever been taught is how to build houses. And I think that will come back. Will I think it will come back ever again the way it is now? Absolutely not. I mean, there was a lot of speculation that occurred and everything else. So I think, again, by creating a system where you're working with the higher learning institutions, I think incubation, Gainesville has it right. Innovation and incubation, helping these small businesses. It's the backbone of our society. It's the backbone of America. It makes up 80% of our workforce. We need to focus our areas on this. We can go up to New York and we can go to those, states that are, taxing out these other industries. But at the end of the day, are we really spending our time wisely? And I think we have a lot of great people in this state that really would have a great benefit. And imagine if we just focused on that and added one employee to each small business in this state. It would cover a lot of opportunities for our unemployed.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question. This is a big issue here. I suspect it's a big issue in Flagler as well. The state has come back and asked counties to pay Medicaid bills.
Oh, wow.
And for the state of, for this county, it's $900,000. Well, if you want to get the county administrator really hot, just say, don't you think it's a great idea that you have to pay that back? Because his argument will be is the bills are for stuff that Medicaid doesn't pay. It's for people who don't live in the county, and the system is such a mess, we don't know if what they're charging us is what we actually owe. What legislative remedy would you seek to that problem?
Well, first off, let me also say we took the same position in Flagler County. Ours wasn't $900,000. Ours was a little over $300,000. Mm-hmm. And you don't put your lack of an efficient system on the backs of local taxpayers. It's wrong. And it's one that we've obviously demonstrated that they had double billing occurring, their system was antiquated, we couldn't even argue whether these residents lived in our county. And so we took the position that we were and are going to take legal action. We work with the Florida Association of Counties in order to kind of create these economies of scale and have these discussions on a much broader level of why that's not working. Again, I think we have to take a serious look at what we're doing with Medicaid. It's growing by leaps and bounds. It's a tremendous part of the state's budget, and obviously we see it in these economic times being utilized more and more. But at the same time, is it a system that local governments are involved with? No. I mean, it's the state system, and they're handing down these unpaid bills to us, so it's not working. Again, having some key stakeholders that are involved with the process. I love the idea of having county administrators involved because they really are seeing what's going on in our community, and offering different solutions on how we better create a system and an environment, certainly with Medicaid billing, that works for everybody. It's not a system in which we're going to get a bill handed to us in 1 year for $350,000 when we're facing unbelievable economic challenges on our own. So I think that there needs to be a broader discussion.
Well, let me, I was going to shut up. I'll just ask one more question.
You can.
And Medicaid, I can't shut up. Bill Proctor, John Thrasher, everybody all say the same thing, that Medicaid is the Pac-Man of the budget, just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and
Yes.
just cutting. Nobody seems to have the solution to slow down that growth or make it a smaller part of the budget, but the other argument is that it's not a growth vehicle except for people who provide those services. So it's becoming a bigger part of the budget, and it doesn't create, it's not an economic engine for growth. So what would you do what would you suggest that the legislature do to control the cost of Medicaid?
I will actually use a great example of what we integrated, and I know the St. John's school system did this with Care Here. They built actually a health clinic for their employees, and what was great about it was that we have seen a cost savings by leaps and bounds within our first year. We did it on a county scale. We're self-insured. And so what we were able to develop is a trend system on what medications were being utilized primarily by our employees. So we did an analysis of generic versus non-generic, and we wanted to make sure that we were watching the trends and that we were able to create an inventory system where those medications were readily available for those that were utilizing those regularly. Huge cost savings. I mean, unbelievable cost savings. You'd be surprised how many people just don't use generic medication. I can't figure out why, but it's something that they felt strongly about. We created an environment to educate about health and wellness. We created an environment for more preventative measures, smoker education, and why it's been detrimental to the healthcare industry overall, and why it's really been detrimental to our costs overall. So I think maybe looking at the Medicaid system and maybe kind of integrating that analysis and seeing where are the users, how are they using the system, is it something where there's a negotiation allowed? For instance, we've had a lot of our employees, they do a once a year assessment, and it's a total blood workup. And what we can derive from that blood workup is an analysis and a recommendation that will put you in a much better condition 5, 10, 15 years out. So they recommend different treatments, but not unnecessary treatments. One that would create those preventative measures. So I think kind of creating that environment of the users of the system and breaking that down and paring that down to which we're understanding the needs, where there's a negotiating process. So if they're in need of a test, they're not just going to the emergency room and there's a ton of tests that are ordered that are driving up the cost of the system. That's really where the costs lie. Most Medicaid patients today are utilizing our emergency rooms as if they're their doctor's office, because doctors are not taking Medicaid payments. So there's a real problem there, and that's across the entire state. I mean, I can speak from our hospital system. Exactly. So my recommendation is to kind of create an environment on a much, hopefully, larger scale. Ours is on a much smaller scale, but it's proven to be quite effective. I've been surprised by the outcomes and surprised by the data we've received today.
Our Senator Thrasher is the one who was the founder of the 1020 Life Law. And there's a gentleman in Putnam County who was trying to scare some kids off who were harassing him, and he fired a gun into the ground. He was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years because he fired the gun in the commission of a crime. And there's been an uproar over that, and also the case in Jacksonville where the woman shot into the wall because I guess to scare off her husband. Do you favor any changes in the 1020 Life Law?
Wow. Yeah, I actually am a believer in the people's right to carry arms and bear arms. I believe in it more on the right to protect your property rather than just having the ability to be in a public setting and utilize that opportunity. which has been, obviously, in current circumstances, we've seen pretty dangerous. So, you know, I would have to really look at the law and make that determination once I really understood and saw more data about it. It's not one that I've researched. I'm familiar with it, but not into an in-depth, you know, understanding where I could make that determination today.
Let me ask you a question about pension reform in the state. What are your views? Should it be reformed? If so, how?
Well, you know, I have to tell you, I think our state has been and has had one of the most solvent pensions, you know, in the country. So, you know, I work closely with our you know, local employees and certainly have seen this 3%. We've held it aside, that 3%, because we know it's going through Supreme Court decisions and such things like that. So we don't know where it's going to come out. You know, I've never seen that's really have been a detrimental issue to the overall economy in the state. I mean, it's not been one that's had a negative impact. I think it's one that's been recently utilized, and maybe folks that feel that our public employees should be paying into the system. You know, we've determined that if that's something the state has required, that's something that we will do. But I mean, beyond that, I don't see a need for real reform and have not seen a need for real reform.
Okay. About class size amendment, you talk about, I think your words is correct investment in education. Could you expand? You talked about a comprehensive overhaul and correct investment. What do you mean by correct investment?
Well, I can
as opposed to incorrect investment, obviously, but
well, the class size amendment. I mean, I understand that was overwhelmingly popular with the public. They voted on it. I mean, it was I think past 62% or something like that. You know, I use an example that what if you have a case or an occurrence where you have 26 students and you know, really you can't put 2 students anywhere, or you know, I mean, you have to create a whole new class.
Right.
That doesn't work. I mean, really, at the end of the day, what is that really doing? It's you know, not really addressing the issue. And if the issue is that teachers need to have a greater ability to teach, and in order to do that, you know, we need to give them the leeway to do that, and not just focus solely on. You know, I'll give an example of my son Chris. My son Chris is 21 now, and he's a great kid and went through the school system. And in 4th grade. He took his education system unbelievably seriously, and even in 4th grade, you know, there was so much pressure put on these 4th graders about just passing this FCAT, and in fact, he stayed up all night. And I remember driving him to school, and he was very upset. He was sweating, and he just was talking about, well, what if I don't pass this? I'm not going to pass 4th grade. I still do fine. Don't think of it like that. But everything was built upon this test, and this whole moment was built upon this test. And it was almost like regurgitating these items, and we went over everything, and but it took away the ability that when I was in school, I remember my teachers when I was in school. I remember how they inspired me and how they kind of molded me into the person today and how they contributed to that. Well, they had the ability to do that. It wasn't just about standardized testing. I mean, I came from a school system in which Regents exams were one that were recognized throughout the state in regards to preparatory items for college. And so it didn't take away from those years in school. That was an enhancement on it, because it's really what you learned, and they measured what you learned through that Regents exam. It wasn't just memorization. It was really about understanding the concepts that we were taught through the school system. So in order to do that, that's the investments that I think we need the overhaul of the system in. I think it's just clearly not working. We can obviously see now they're adjusting, you know, how they now measure the tests and, you know, how they grade those. And you can't change it because it's not working. And then tomorrow to say, wow, we had a bunch of students that didn't pass this or didn't pass this, so now we have to change the standards, they're too tough. No, the standards aren't too tough, it's just not working. And let's come to terms with that and have a greater discussion. And if that requires everybody rolling up their sleeves and really saying this is going to be our priority and our investment, and we're not stopping until we set these standards of greatness and what we want to be as an education system in the state of Florida. So, I understood the need for the classroom discussion, but I just don't think it's working, and I don't think it's creating this end solution that's beneficial to the students, and I certainly don't think it's beneficial to the teachers that are really under a tremendous amount of pressure to not only, again, get these dollars in, to get A-rated schools, to do all this, and at the end of the day, it's just a loss for everybody.
You mentioned Viva Florida and how it's going to be a great opportunity for us here in Flagler County, but what exactly will be the kind of impact you all are talking about? I mean, we hear about it, but we hear more about what South Florida is doing than what is really going to come forward. And again, it's a money issue, so could you kind of elaborate?
Well, I know the hotel and lodging industry is very excited about this, and my hope is that we had a discussion at the regional council to kind of create how we're all going to be in this together. And I also do serve on the Florida Regional Planning Council Association Board of Directors, and so there's 11 regional councils across the state. And so I think taking that opportunity for all of us to benefit in this. If you look at the state, I mean, as I said earlier, the state is rich in history, but the counties are particularly rich in history. One that most, unless you live in the county, really don't fully comprehend, that a lot of, historic events, significant historic events have taken place throughout our counties. And we need to tell our story. We need to better tell our story. But we can do that by utilizing this event appropriately and the magnitude and the opportunity of having those stories discussed. Whether it's doing reenactments or recreations or involving the families, the settlers that have been here for year after year to share their stories. So an economic impact, obviously, immediately, I think, to our small business community is going to be significant. Hopefully, it'll be one that kind of dovetails a little bit following that. I think our lodging industry is going to see a direct benefit to that. If we can get the state to recognize that the online travel companies should be paying their tax, that it would be a great revenue sharing and sales tax to the state of Florida as well as to local communities, and to the bed tax collection. So I think those revenues will give us the further ability to market our counties even further. So it's kind of capitalizing on an opportunity to have an economic environment right at our doorstep. But to have the rest of the country, as they do in different parts of the country, and recognize their history, to really have them say, wow, I had no idea that Florida had this history. I had no idea what the history was. So it gives us the identity to tell our story. Hopefully it gives us the focus to continue to keep that identity when you're talking about growth management, you're talking about education, and you're talking about all these issues that encompass everything, economic development. We tell our story and we tell it right. It's gonna give us that advantage in the long run to keep who we are and not change who we are.
So we get this 2 year, 1 year, 2 year celebration going, and then it's over. So then where do we go?
But as I said, I think we keep it going. I think we have the dollars now put in place where we can market our counties to other people to come into our community.
But then the counties will have to start picking up more of the municipalities.
And they do. I mean, if you look at what TDC has done up here
Right.
in St. Johns County, they changed the system entirely. I mean, I know Ken Bryan
Right.
really well. He and I've had discussions about what they've done. I mean, you think about if St. Augustine or St. Johns County decided tomorrow, what makes us unique? Well, it's not our history. We don't really benefit from our history. Can you imagine the change in landscape to this community? I mean, it's beautiful. It's unbelievable. So you have to keep that eye on the ball. And I think if you don't grab this opportunity and say, this is a start of something greater with all of us, and we can all work in cooperation and support each other's history, there is a value there that I think has been untapped, and it's a resource that we really need to delve into further.
So this will be the impetus. Let me ask
Yes.
another question. You're a Democrat,
I am.
and you're running in a Democrat primary,
Yes.
and Tallahassee is a Republican-dominated legislature,
Yes.
and the Democrats tend to sit in the back row. And so,
Well, and if anybody knows me, they can tell you in the last 6 years,
Yeah.
I never sit in the back row. I mean,
Well,
it's
I
just not
understand,
something.
the speaker puts you where the
Absolutely.
speaker says she will go.
Is that where it is?
But what I'm looking for more is the relationships. You've got some ideas here
Yeah.
that are really going to take some forging relationships across the aisle.
Well,
So how much of that have you done?
sure.
I understand, being represented in being present in cabinet meetings and these regional boards, so.
Absolutely. Senator Thrasher, for instance, he's the other one when I argued before the governor and cabinet, stood shoulder to shoulder with me. And I'll tell you how that's kind of curtailed into a surprise when I decided to run. And I announced, later than most. And it was obviously a situation I had to really think about, giving up my position on the commission. But Dawn, who's the representative for the Teachers Association, called me and she said, it was Saturday, and she said, I got to tell you who told me about you running. It was Senator Thrasher. And she goes, I was a little taken back because he said, you have to meet this young lady. She's pretty impressive and she's done a lot of things. So she said it's very rare that you hear of a Republican senator ensuring that I speak to a Democratic candidate, certainly because he's endorsing my opponent in the general. But I have formed those relationships. I have not taken, I've not made partisan decisions as a commissioner. I've made decisions in the best interest of our residents, and I will continue to do so. I have forged relationships with many different legislators throughout the years as my service. And I have Doug Wiles that's helping me quite a lot in this race, and he has given me some words of wisdom on how he's been very effective, or was very effective as a legislator in a similar circumstance. So I think I have the ability to cross aisle. I have an endorsement list in Flagler County that not only has Republican mayors and Democratic chairs, but it's Thursday night I have a very large fundraiser from the residents of Hammock Beach, and they had such a positive response that they had to move the location. Well, that's 99% Republican, and they know me, they know what I'm capable of, and they also know that I have the ability to bring people together and build a consensus, and it's something that I'm very proud that I've been able to do in Flagler.
Okay.
We're close. What would you like to say to close this meeting? It's up to you.
Well, I just first want to thank you for this opportunity. I've grown to love St. Johns County and St. Augustine, and working with closely with a lot of those people that I've served with. And I do believe this is a critical time for representation in Tallahassee. I also believe it's a time in which you need that leadership that's going to take a stand on important positions and have the understanding and knowledge how to create solutions in order to create a better tomorrow. I believe I have a lot of those qualities, and I've demonstrated those abilities along the way. And I'm looking forward to this next chapter. Flagler County has been my home, but this district will be my home, and I will remain diligent in the representation and certainly forming those relationships and continuing to do so. I've always had an open door policy. I've always been one, as one of those great listeners. My father always said, if you're talking, you're not really listening, and you can't really get that much done. So, at the end of the day, I believe that there are real solutions out there that we can come up with, not only immediately, but long term. And I look forward to being part of the process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.